Yeah. Okay. All right.
Mr. Andrew Denton has driven
Excuse
back
me one
into
second,
the building.
George. I really do have to contradict that lie about this group wanting to merge with Cronulla. You know, and you said in your book that we stood side by side with you on that, and I really think you should retract that statement in public right now.
Listen, I won't retract anything in that statement right now, Andrew. You and the others put your hand up. Nicholas Pappas was there, made his jaw hit the floor. You're kidding yourself. Deidre stood in front of the door and said, look, if you don't move, Deidre, I'll move you. Now, don't try to
George,
you did that. Andrew, you did it.
George, that is a lie and an outright lie, and you know it is, mate. I put my career on the line for 2 years for this club, not to merge, George Piggins. You're just telling lies, mate, and you're lowering yourself.
No, I'm not.
You are lying, George.
No, I'm not. You're the liar, and I wish you'd come out and call me a liar to my face.
When I see you on
George, if you call it, you'll finish on your arse. I'm telling you.
George, if that's the way you want to do business, that's fine. But I won't have you going around slandering me.
Listen, I never slandered you. I told you what you did.
That is not true, George.
It is true, you know.
That is not true, George.
It is true.
This is a desperate throw of the dice, George. You can't play the ball, so you're playing the man.
No, I don't. No, I don't, Andrew. So if you think you're that big, mate, you come along and tell me.
George, I'm telling you to your face now.
Well, that's about as close as you'll get, I'm telling you. Because you're too bloody weak to do anything else.
George, I'm not in this to fight you physically. If that's how you want to run the club.
Listen, you're the one who just come back to the studios, jumped on the phone and shot the endos at me, mate. I'm telling the truth. I don't need you
George,
on
that
radio
is not the truth.
I don't need you on radio telling me I'm a liar. Now,
George, you are calling me. You are suggesting that I backed a merger of South Sydney. Now, you were very happy to have my help and Michael Whitney's help.
You weren't even on the board the night that thing was taken. What are you talking about? You were a guest of the board that night.
Well, hang on, George, what are you saying? Are you saying that I backed a merger or I didn't? What are you suggesting?
Well, you were there in the room.
Yes, George.
And you know what you said? I tell you if I can remember what you said. You've got to go and talk to him, George.
Of course. Of course, George.
Andrew, every team that went and talked is merged by now.
Yes, George.
That's correct.
Did I ever at any stage say we should merge?
Yes, mate, that night...
Did I ever at any stage say we should merge, George?
That night the board moved to merge.
Did I? George, I wasn't on that board, as you just said.
That's correct. You weren't on that board, but you said, George, you've got to go and talk to him.
Of course you've got to go and talk, George. That's how you run rugby league clubs. You talk.
You never had a vote that night, so don't say you did. You were there as a guest.
George, I never backed a merger. Why would I have spent the next 2 years affecting my own career fighting for Souths to stand alone if I backed a merger, George? Why would I have done that?
Well, Andrew, did the board move to merge? Did the board move that night to merge? I'll ask you the question. Did they that night move to merge that night?
That's not my recollection, George. But even if they did, George,
mate, all of a sudden your mind's at a lapse.
George, even if they did, it doesn't matter. People like
even if it did, you know they bloody did.
George,
You're too weak to admit it.
George, even if they did, people like Eddie Obeid, Ron Honig, people who shopped the club, as you know, who wanted the club to merge, you now break bread with them, George. They're your guests at the club, which is more than I can say for Kerry Stokes, who you still haven't met.
Well, mate, I sent the man an invitation to lunch. What else do you want me to do?
Well, George...
Honest to God, now I've done that. I've seen that cheap shot in the paper this morning.
George, let me remind you...
man shotting a little cheap shots.
George, let me remind you, the night that South came back into the competition, Kerry Stokes was in that stadium as a guest of Russell Crowe and myself. Did you go and say hello to him or thank you? You could have walked down 3 flights of stairs and done that.
Mate, no one told me he was down there.
You didn't know your major sponsor was in the grounds, George?
No, I did not. No one informed me.
Well, George, shouldn't you...
I don't see him, I don't know.
George, this is the man that saved the club financially, and you as the chairman didn't even know he was there.
You can leave all your cheap shots and try.
They're not cheap, George.
Yes, they are.
Why are they cheap? This is your responsibility as chairman, is it not?
God, straight me, Dad. If I send an invitation to the man to lunch, I asked my CEO to do it. What else do you want me to do?
I want you...
Come on, like, fair dinkum. Do you think I broke bread with every other major sponsor that that's gave us $1 million? You know, those people run billion-dollar companies and they probably don't even want to talk to me.
You know what, George? You've got to make an effort.
Mate, God strike me dead. Fancy you putting that on me. Make an effort.
You've got to make an effort with your major sponsor, George.
Mate, you weren't even a member the night you and Nicholas come over to my place. and wanted to get on the board, Andrew. You weren't even a member. Make an effort. You couldn't even make an effort to be a member up to 2 years ago.
George, the first...
Is that true? Is that true or
the
not?
first time I rang you...
Andrew, is that true or not?
George, the first time
Andrew,
I rang you...
Just answer the question, yes or no. Is it true?
The first time I rang you to help the club, George, was 1991.
Andrew, the books will tell you if you're telling the truth. Is that truth or not?
The first time I rang you to help the club, George, was 1991.
Answer the question, please.
You've been very happy to take my free help over the years.
Please answer the question.
For 13 years, George.
Mate, that was like the letter you wrote me and telling me and Nolene sent her flowers. What a lovely... And the next week you sent that other letter that you described as a little bit differently. Remember that, mate?
Yeah, that's right, George, because publicly...
I've got the two letters and I'll send them out to the public.
I'm very happy for you to do that, George, because publicly I've done everything I can to support this club. Privately, you and I disagreed.
Privately, we extremely disagree. Extremely different.
We do, George. And frankly, George, if your way of resolving a disagreement is to punch me in the face, well, that's fine.
I'm not going to cop a wimp like you standing over me, I'm telling you.
George,
You're a wimp, and that's all you'll ever be.
George, you're the one that's trying to threaten me with physical violence.
Mate, look,
if you don't want to hear criticism, George...
I don't mind criticism. You come back to put this on, you've got your little argument, I'll give you one. Now, I don't think you've got the ability to go any further.
Is that right, George? Well, we'll see. I mean, the fact of the matter is, for the first time in 14 years, the members have a choice.
You're good with your tongue, mate, but you're about as strong with your tongue as what you were in the board meeting when you gave your resignation. You couldn't put up with a hard argument.
George...
So you run.
You didn't have a hard argument, George, and you still don't. And, George, let me tell you this. George, I'm not a fighter, mate. You could whip me with one hand tied behind your back. And if that's the way you want to do it, George, well, let that be an example of how South Sydney is run.
Well, how South Sydney is run. Have a look at the 9 balance sheets. That's all you've got to do with the last 13 balance sheets. And if you've got an argument with me, KPMG done them. If you've got an argument with me then, I'll speak to you.
George, have a look at the last 9 months' back pages.
What about the 9 months back
That's how
pages?
this club is run.
What do you mean by that?
Mate, a club in crisis. A club in crisis. Is there a journalist in town that you can't talk to about your every inner thought, George?
Mate, what do you mean by that? Now, listen, Andrew, I've never rang a radio station in my life.
No, I'm not talking about that, George.
I don't ring reporters and I don't ring newspapers and I don't ring
No,
TV
they ring
stations.
you, George. They ring you because they know you're always great for a quote.
Listen, the name of this game, Rugby League, is about sponsorship, marketing and exposure.
Who's our marketing manager, George?
And mate, the only thing that's kept this club alive is the way it has been portrayed over the last few months, and people want to be there to try and help it. That's the only thing that's kept us alive.
Who's our marketing manager, George?
What do you mean, who's our marketing manager?
Who's our marketing manager?
Well, what do you mean by that?
Who? You say marketing is what keeps the club alive. Who's our marketing manager?
Well, David Tapp was our marketing manager.
David Tapp is our CEO. Who's our marketing manager?
But he was also...
So we're the only club in the competition that doesn't have its own marketing manager. Why is that, George?
Well, what do you think of why? Why is that? Why? Why haven't we got one?
Well, you say marketing keeps the club alive, but we don't have a marketing manager.
Oh, yes. Well, David Tapp,
but he's a CEO.
He has the dual position. He's very good at it too.
He is a good man, David Tapp.
George Piggins, Andrew Denton. The judges' cards will call that 50-50, and the only round that really matters will be the one that happens on Sunday.
Correct.
And look, George, just want to make it clear to you, Andrew came back under his own steam. There's no doubting for all the listeners out there of the passions of these two men, and certainly the passions that are at stake. And it'll be 950 voters next Sunday who make the final decision. I want to thank you both for your time, George Piggins and Andrew Denton. We do have to take a quick tip from Clocker Thompson. His late mail brought to you by William Inglis and Son. Clocker. No, he's gone, and I can imagine that basically Clocker was as absorbed in that conversation as the rest of us were. And Andrew, I guess the thing that we want to make clear to our listeners was that's not a George Piggins ambush. You've come back under your own steam.
Look, in fairness to you guys, yes, I'm sorry I burst back in on your radio show.
Good security here at 2SM.
No, I was outside listening, and you know, I probably shouldn't have done that, but there you go. Passions do run deep. It is a big thing to be accused wrongly of betraying the club. You know, that's a low blow which needs to be answered.
Thank you very much, Andrew. And Ray Warren, you got to love this game.
I'm absolutely flabbergasted, to use a word of Rex Mossett's. But anyway, I mean, it was great radio, and we're just about to take you to Rose Hill for what is the Northerly Stakes. I hope the big horse